The Black Lives Matter movement has been at the forefront of Americans' minds in the fight for racial justice since 2013. However, in addition to the Black Lives Matter movement, there should be something else. Something that asserts the right and justice for another race mass populated in the US, the Asian Americans. There should be a broad, unified movement, the Yellow Lives Matter movement, that crosses the barriers between the various non-profit organizations that operates on behalf of the AAPI rights. I would argue that what is happening with the Black people today in America befalls Asian Americans too, and that we Asian Americans need one unified movement similar to the BLM. The stereotypes projected onto us are interestingly the exact opposite of those associated with the Black people. Smart, diligent, but also submissive, marginal. No Asian American in the United States could evade these stereotypes, these deeply rooted stereotypes. These words are like tags that follow on us wherever we go, whether at work, at school, or in social life. Racism against Asian Americans is real and more action is needed. Unified messaging among the various pro-AAPI groups will bring Asian American rights more into the minds of many citizens and provide a single platform for discussion and civic action. Thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement and the increased awareness of anti-Black racism, Americans have become more sensitive to their language and behavior toward Black people. But what about the language they use toward and about us, the Asians? 4.7 GPA? What are you, Asian? I don't know how many times my classmates have said things like this, making it seem absolutely normal for an Asian student to get good grades. In perpetuating such stereotypes, they deny Asian students hard work simply by racializing us as Asians and pretending our race predetermines our grades. Are Asians born mastering calculus? Of course not. Yet many still are unaware of their underlying aggression in their daily words toward Asians. I became even more galvanized after hearing some hard-training news happen in the US, like the shooting in Atlanta, Georgia on March 17th, which led to the death of 8 Asian ladies, or the assault of a senior Asian American woman in New York on March 29th. What the Asian American community is undergoing right now is similar in some ways to the fatal police shooting of Black people in the past year. Whereas the state wields its power to suppress Black people, individuals perform anti-Asian hate crimes, often in the middle and upper class Asian neighborhoods. The poet and author Cassie Park Cohn once wrote that Asian Americans have also been victims to systematic racism throughout history, but have been conditioned to pretend that it doesn't exist, to minimize it. Per Cohn, the formal outcries against Americans' anti-Asian xenophobia from the Asian American community have been lesser than such outcries on behalf of other groups. In part, she argues that this is a question of conditioning towards assimilation. I would also say it's due to the separation and division among pro-AAPI groups. They must be unified and make action to fight back together. While the Black people endured a long history of slavery, the Asians were also racially targeted in the history of the United States. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act precluded any Chinese immigrants from entering the US after Chinese almost singularly constructed America's first transcontinental railroad. In the 1940s, President Franklin Roosevelt falsely accused the innocent Japanese Americans of potential criminal activity. He passed the Executive Order 1966, which puts all the Japanese Americans on the West Coast into internment camps. The history between the Black and the Asians in America is similar, but the Asian Americans do not yet have a unified voice in fighting hate speech and oppression. They need one. Racism has always existed against both the African American and Asian American communities. Americans just haven't yet realized the similarity between the two. Asian Americans need to leverage existing resources and activist groups to stand up for themselves and make their voices heard in solidarity with other oppressed racial minorities. With a new movement, people will consider their language and behavior when confronting Asian Americans, and that hate crimes and Asian hate will diminish and eventually become a thing of the past.